Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of our new Secretary of Air Force, the Honorable Frank Kendall, and our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown, Jr., thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. So I will tell you, I walk around a lot, and I use my hands a lot, and I was told this stage is not the steadiest, so it could be entertaining. But on a Sunday morning, after all the events that have happened, and I know these things can go long into the day and into the evening, it was good to see some familiar faces that were in the Starbucks line, so we got plenty caffeinated for this morning. These symposiums are so important, I think, because they offer the opportunity for fellowship, to be able to reminisce a little bit, get back together again, have discussions about what's gone on, and discussions about what's going on today. And then through these professional development, we start looking into the future on where we're going to be tomorrow. And that's really what I want to spend, if I might, just a couple of minutes talking about where we are going to go tomorrow, because we are going to go together. And I understand that this is for the entire National Guard, and so I will, with respect and understanding that there are characteristics and attributes that apply both to the Army and the Air Guard, I will be speaking primarily as an airman with respect to our Guard partners in the total force and the Air Force, but I think many of these themes are applicable with the Army Guard as well. When we look at where we are as a total force, and we look at what the nation expects of its joint force in national security, it no longer even resembles anything you could recognize maybe 40 years ago. And that's been a pretty remarkable evolution and transformation in the way that the National Guard has really inserted and become such an integral and inextricable part of our national security in ways that it hasn't been throughout its very storied history. Let's look at the paper, if anybody reads the paper, the news, however you get your news. Right now, I understand that a few of our tags had to depart because there's something called IDA going on. And they're going to be deeply, deeply involved in helping to secure our citizens and help manage that situation as it unfolds, a very dangerous hurricane. What else is going on? There's a thing called Afghanistan. A perilous departure from Afghanistan, a retrograde. Our Guard partners are right there with us in the fight, doing the retrograde. And oh, by the way, some of those are coming back to the States. Some of those Afghans are coming back, and they need to be housed and fed and cared for, and that requires leadership, and the National Guard is stepping up there, playing a very, very pivotal role. Wildfires are still burning. We've already dumped over 1.23 million gallons in the last year or so. And that's a dangerous mission. COVID's still here. National Guard has stepped up throughout the entire pandemic from the very beginning. Remember when it was just about a cruise ship, and then it was just about masks, and then it was about how we distribute the therapeutics and the vaccines? Seems like a long time ago. Guard's been right in the middle of that. Domestic disturbance, tens of thousands. The Guard's stepping up for that. So in all of the areas that our nation's citizens see danger or insecurity, the answer to that is very often a Guardsman. And so that credibility that you bring to the nation about what we can do as a joint force and what specifically you can do uniquely as citizen airmen is key. You're often the face. That's the face of what our citizens see. Internationally, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but also when they see it on the news, they'll look and they go, oh, I know her or I know him, because you're embedded in the community. And that is something that the active duty will never be able to do to the extent that the Guard can. So as we go through these tumultuous changes here and there, you're that face of stability, because they know when things go wrong, they're probably recognizing your faces more than the active duty. And that is something that has become so important and integral that we can never forget. That value proposition that the Guard brings is something that we should cherish, and we should make sure never, ever slides. Again, we mentioned that when people are scared, when people need things rebuilt, when people look at how am I going to get my life back together, it's really the Guard that is often leading the way. And that's a part of our national security that I think we need to make sure that we never, ever let slide as well. You're the face. You're the credible part to what Americans see. But what we can't forget is that you are also an integral part of our combat power. And that may not be as obvious because American citizens don't see that coming outside their door every day like they do some of the other things we've discussed. But we don't go to war at all anymore without fully integrated the total force. There's not a fight that we say, well, we'll call the Guard later. They're just a reserve and they're good, but we don't want to bug them right now. It doesn't happen. We do not have a force that's capable of doing what we need to do without the total force. So we have evolved from working together, from having segregated missions, to now this interdependence, to where we have to fight together. We're better for fighting together. And we're able to do it because the National Guard, and I have to be honest with you, the manner in which the TAG leadership out there works to ensure that all of the different statuses, you have to serve many, many masters, is one of the more complicated I think I've seen in any sort of an enterprise, any sort of a bureaucracy. But it's so transparent, because when the call comes, nobody cares about that, except for you have to get her done and make that happen. And so that's something I just personally have so much respect for the leadership of the National Guard, because you have to understand how to do that in a way that's consistent with the law, consistent with the Constitution, consistent with the expectations of multiple commanders and leaders, without a full understanding of what it takes to get that done. But you do it. It's just pretty darn impressive. So back to this combat power thing. We have integrated throughout our force very similar combat power within the Guard, Reserves, and the active duty. And so when you have that type of a force, you know that whatever you do, you got to do it together. As you adapt and evolve and change, we have to do it together. So let's talk about change. It was mentioned that the chief had this document called Accelerate, Change, or Lose. I love this document, by the way. I love it. Because traditionally, strategy documents that were for public consumptions on the coffee tables, they're very cheerleader-ish, right? So the idea that a document that has the Chief of Staff of the Air Force on it and actually has the word lose was pretty unprecedented, quite frankly. But that's why I love it, because it lays out the consequences. We could actually lose. We could lose in strategic competition. We could lose in the credibility of our capabilities to be able to deter. We could lose the proposition that the Air Force is a force that we want our brightest and best young citizens to come and join. We could lose the opportunity to get those airmen. There's a lot at stake here. And the other word I like, it's not change. We all know we have to change. We know that. It's accelerate. Because if you focus on the word change, you're focusing on the wrong one. The world's changing. Everybody's changing. But if we continue to change at the same pace, it ain't going to happen. There's no way that we are going to be able to maintain the edge that we need and regain the edge that we've lost a bit over the past 20 years. So the idea of that document really lays out the idea that we could lose and then what's at stake. That's what I really love about that. So we talk about What is at stake? It's strategic competition. We're back in an era of strategic competition. We don't have a pure analog, and I'm not up here to tell you that we're in a Cold War again. But the Cold War was the last time that we had something against which we could compare now strategic competitors. And currently it's been laid out through the interim national security strategy guidance. They're rewriting the national defense strategy. But the theme is still there, and it's still consistent that we see China as our primary strategic competitor, and then shortly followed by Russia. But I would submit that there's a difference here. And I know history also makes things a lot clearer than they are during the time of when the events are happening. But there's a significant difference between the way that the strategic competition with China is unfolding than it was with the Soviet Union. There were some precipitating events that really drew our attention and sort of were a call to action throughout the Cold War. You had the Sputnik moment, right? We had the Cuban Missile Crisis. We had some of these others in which it galvanized the nation to do some things that were, maybe not in our best economic interest, but we understood the national security imperative, the strategic competition imperative. And I would say that one of the reasons is because the Soviet doctrine was very clear. It was very clear that there was an existential fight, that there was only going to be one winner, and it was a zero-sum game. Armed with that, it was fairly clear that it needs to be existential to us as well, especially when both sides were developing nuclear weapons that could wipe out civilization as we know it. So the idea of what was at stake was very clear in the Soviet doctrine. Now here in China, we have a strategic competitor that has intertwined and intermingled economically and in other areas that makes it a little bit more complicated, makes it a little bit more ambiguous, makes it a little bit more opaque. But make no mistake that what the Chinese want to do is they would like to alter the current international order in a way that better favors them. It's not an unrealistic thing to consider. But what does that look like? What are the consequences of that? I think as we unpack that, we still see that what that end state would look like really digs at the core of what, over a couple hundred years ago, the founders put together as a constitution. This idea of individual liberty, this idea of the individual freedoms that we enjoy. You don't get that in a surveillance state that uses facial recognition technology and that sort of thing to be able to identify your value in how loyal you are to the state apparatus. Sounds like an Orwellian fiction novel, but it's actually a future that we could see. That's what's at stake. But it's a little bit more opaque. That's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is the unprecedented pace of change. Things are moving out. I mean, we could go over example after example after example, but the pace of change is a factor that we need to consider because we can no longer adapt and transform in the same manner that we've done before if it takes the same amount of time, because we will never catch up. And that's why the accelerate change is key. So if we need to accelerate change, we need to make sure that we modernize, we develop the capabilities that can deter and confront on the military side where China is going, for example, so we don't ever actually have to fight them. But to do that, we need to understand that they've gone to school with our traditional way of war. They've seen it. They've seen how it's been successful, and they have really built an apparatus and a system and an approach to warfare that has really made our traditional American way of fighting a little bit less successful in its concept. It's been made possible by technology, but it's been accelerated by sort of an authoritarian path that they can move faster than we have been moving. Plus, for the last 20 years, we've been focusing on other threats to our nation. Moving forward, we have to understand the competition that we're in, the pace at which that competition is unfolding, and look at how we are going to develop our capabilities our approach to warfare to accommodate the change in the character of war. That's what's in front of us. And as we do that, we need to understand, based on what I opened with, that we are inextricably linked as a joint force and as a total force. So wherever we move, we got to move together. We do not have the ability for one element of our force to go one way and one to go another way. We have to ensure that our capabilities are the right capabilities. They have to be connected. They have to be persistent. They have to be resilient. They have to be survivable in a high-end fight. Unfortunately, not all of our capabilities are. And I mean all of us. These are just 4 weapon systems that, are in the total force. Active Guard and Reserves. The Guard has just under 50% of our C-130 fleet, about a little over a third of our F-16 fleet, a little under about 3 in 10 of our A-10s, and about 42% of our KC-135. So as a total force, we have a lot of systems that in and of themselves will not compete. Now, that's not to say these are all irrelevant, but we have to find the right size, the right shape, put them in the right place to be able to be postured for action at the right time. So this is not to say that trying to get rid of everything and we're going to start from scratch. We can't. And some of these platforms are very relevant. We just have to get sized right and shaped right. And that's a total force thing. That is for all of us to work on together. And that's something the Chief's been very, very interested in how we do that. He's made several trips with General Lowe and right there with us to a couple of the tags and some of the senators in some of the states and talking about that and talking about the problem that we're trying to deal with, the challenges that we have, and really trying to be as transparent as possible. Because that's going to be the key. Fully understanding what's at stake and how we might transform together is going to be key, because we either hang together or we hang separately. But we've got to move out on modernizing this force, shaping it right, and ensuring we have the right capabilities with the right readiness, the right posture at the right time. And Mike and the Air Guard team have been working so well with us in letting us understand and appreciate, maybe a way we hadn't appreciated before, some of the other nuances. Because as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a complexity in the way that you do your business in the States. In each of the 54, there's a complexity that's really best understood by the folks, the leadership here in this room. And so we have a lot to learn too, but we also have a lot that we need to convey to make sure we're having that dialogue together. Because if we don't get this right, we may not be equipped to deter China. If China isn't deterred, we're in a bad spot. So, what does that look like? And you got to hang with me on this one. It's Sunday morning. I like the analogy, so just stick with me on the graphic. I'll try and explain. It looks a little cartoonish, but if you're going to change, you start off with something and then you change, and there's a lot of pressure, there's chaos, there's temperature, and heat and light, and you come out the other side looking like something. And the idea is that if all you do is just fight for survival and want to be the same thing, those are carbon, by the way, carbon molecules, stick with me. Get subject to heat and energy and everything. And if all your goal is, I want to stay just like I am, I got to preserve what I got, that's what you get on the other end. You'll be a little bit more hot and bothered and might be more separated from the other elements of it, but you could probably survive that. That's not what we need. What we need is to actually have that heat and pressure and temperature come to the right level to where we become a stronger element together on the other side. We become that diamond. Now here's the thing. I started off and I had on the left side was a lump of coal, but then I knew I had a brilliant crowd out here, so I figured I better get my science right, and I did look it up, and thank God I did, because that's a myth, by the way. It doesn't come from carbon. It doesn't come from coal. It comes from carbon. So I figured someone of you would call me out on this, but the analogy remains the same. We have to do this together. We have to respond to this. We're in that mix right here, because This is what losing looks like. And I would submit that a little over half a decade ago, when we were coming on the other end of sequestration trying to figure it out, that we may not have had the dialogue that we needed. Again, I was there during it, so I'm not going to decompose it or do the forensics, because there were lots of reasons, lots of things happened. But I think that's the outcome that we got. I'm not sure how much we actually took the opportunity and changed in the manner that we needed to then. And I think that might have put us a little bit further behind right now than where we need to be. So we can't do that. We have to change together. Because like I said, we're an inextricable force now, the active duty and the Guard. So we have to change together. And that becomes more dialogue, more collaboration. And the Chief is committed to that. The Secretary is committed to that. We have a great Director of the Air National Guard and Mike that knows that we need to do that. And that's why the Chief wanted to make sure if I pass nothing else on, that's the message, that when we accelerate change or lose, we have to do it together. And he is committed to transparency and having a dialogue anytime with any of the leaders to make sure that we move forward together. That's the key. So what that means is we have to understand how we mold the entire force moving forward. I'm using a generalization of a traditional model of some of the capabilities that we've developed that have become resident in the Guard. When I say traditional, and I know that this doesn't cover all specialties or capabilities, but in some sense, one of the reasons why the Guard has such a great ready force that doesn't take as long to train up, that has the leadership basically on demand, that is something we've been calling on more and more as a nation. Some of that seasoning happens in the active duty, and that's still going to be the way it is. However, imagine if you're trying to do that model for all of the new missions that come up that we haven't even imagined yet, or the manner in which we're going to use new capabilities, whether they be autonomous or cyber or whatever it is. If the idea was that the active duty would take on that mission, and after enough years of it, it'd have enough of the seasoned talent that they could transition into the Guard. That's sort of the traditional way. We can't do that with everything. Why? Because the pace of change will not allow us to do that. We would transform into the total force we need too late. So, but there is still some room for that, but we have to watch how much of that we do. Some of that you do in parallel. I would submit that right now, some of the things we're doing, I would say with respect to the F-35, KC-46, we're sort of having about the same time. And so there are some things that we're learning from our Guard units that are transferring across. There are associations. There's some things we're learning from the active duty, but we're sort of growing that together. Some of that's going to need to continue because we're going to need to ramp up and learn these things together. And then some things are actually we're going to be following. And I would use as an example, I think some of you may have seen that recently, just last couple of days, the Air Force announced the base of preference for Mansfield, Ohio, for the new cyber warfare wing. So that'll be sort of a moving. Thank you very much. That's new for us. If that comes to pass, and again, I'm not trying to get ahead of any legislation or anything else. That was just the base of preference. But this is where we don't have one of those in the total force. So we in the active duty will be following the Guard's leadership on this. We'll be learning from them. That has to happen as well. We have to have a combination of all three of these things if we're going to accelerate together. Because there's no other way that we're going to be able to succeed if we don't do this. And again, that's more collaboration, that's more moving through this as a team and understanding really what makes sense, how to size and shape and put the right capabilities in the right total force. A little non sequitur here, but I'm just about done, but I do want to talk about this to all of NGAUS here, and that's the State Partnership Program. Now I'm pulling back a little bit from my time as Vice Chief of Staff, to my time as the Joint Staff J5, to my time as the UCOM J58. I got to tell you, team, this is one of the, I don't know if I should say underappreciated, but one of the most bang for the buck that I've seen is this State Partnership Program. For the money that is assigned against it, the value that it provides is something like I haven't ever seen. You know, the term "you can't surge trust," that's what this is. This state partnership program is building those levels of trust, and it keeps expanding. I've always been, anybody who's heard me talk about it, if we keep expanding the number of states we have partnerships with, let's start expanding money into the programs, because we don't have to have a smaller piece of the pie for everyone, because these sort of things, I've been pitching, I've been talking to Mike, I've been talking to Dan Hokinson. Could you imagine if the Chinese tried to do something like we're able to do right now with this Afghanistan evacuation? Some of the countries that were able to have them at least temporarily go to be able to house them until we get the final disposition of them in such a short amount of time. What sort of luck do you think they'd have there? Not so much. And I will tell you, it's things like the State Partnership Program that give the United States that credibility with non-traditional allies and partners, but partners that the Guard has built up this relationship with of trust that is expanded throughout that nation that says, yeah, we're still with you. We're a part of this. We'll help you out, even though it might be a little politically tough, might not be in our interest, but we trust America because we trust the relationships that our countries have had with the state leadership, more than we fear what the risk, the consequences of not doing it. So I got to tell you, this is one of those, in my mind, I would love to see sort of a regionalization. If there's something that a regional partner wants that one state doesn't have, but you're the lead state, you're the lead sled dog with that nation, and so you reach across to your other tags and say, hey, can you help a brother or a sister out here, and maybe we can go together? That takes more resources and stuff. So I'm not the guy with the money, but I'll tell you this right here, this is what strategic competition looks like too, by the way. This is where the Guard is leading in strategic competition, because those relationships that you've built are going to be the things that see us through in the tougher times. So I will end just about with that, but just sort of close how I open, which is to say this idea of accelerate, change, or lose is something that this chief is committed to and believes in the depth of his soul. I am there with him. And we are looking, and we understand that when we do this, there will be tough choices. But those tough choices are not ones we're going to make individually. We have to accelerate together because the consequences are that consequential, he said, to repeat himself. But we have the leadership. We have the leadership in the tags. We have the tremendous leadership with the DANG. We have the tremendous leadership with the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, Dan Hokinson. So there's no excuse not to. We just need to roll up our sleeves and get to it. Hey, thank you all very much on a Sunday morning. I appreciate your time. I think we've time to take some questions if you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Allvin. We have a couple of mics set up out there in the audience. I know it's a little tough to see. We've got one here over on our left and one on the right. Let's start here on the left. We've got, just for the audience, we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So go ahead, please, over on the left. You go ahead and, is that on? Or the guys in back, can they turn that on?
Test.
There you go.
Morning, General.
Morning.
My name is Lieutenant Caleb Barnett from the 179th Airlift Wing in Mansfield, Ohio. Though it is a sad time that our planes will be getting divested, it is exciting for the new cyber capability mission. I was part of the team that put together a site survey to really pitch why we should be selected in the state of Ohio. So I kind of just wanted to get your idea of the new capabilities that are going to come and continue to come with cyber warfare, and how the Joint Chiefs are addressing that.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Yeah, this idea of a cyber warfare wing, it's overdue. It's overdue. When we look at not only the vulnerabilities that we have, but understanding how China is looking to fight and how they're looking to weaponize everything. we need to have enough of a robust capability to not only understand how to defend not only our networks, but our systems and everything else, but understand how to get in. This is the cyber warfare wing. These are things we need to understand their capabilities, a more depth of understanding of what makes them work, what their vulnerabilities are, how and when we would integrate cyber into the rest of the joint warfight, because I believe that's probably one of the least mature pieces of it. Cyber has such a devastating possibility of its effects, but it's also the least integrated, between that and space, I would say, is the least integrated into our ConOps, into the way, the timing, the mass that you can produce with cyber, all those sort of things is not been fully baked in, because I think mostly we've been worried about, let's just take cyber to defend our networks, and then let's do some very exquisite and very powerful things, but largely run through cybercom. But we need to understand as an Air Force how we better integrate cyber into the way that we fight as part of the joint force. This is a growth industry, but it's a growth industry that, as I said, we're going to be looking to you, Mansfield, to help us understand that on how we leverage the talent, how we integrate that talent, and how we move that into war planning, and how we move it into the day-to-day strategic competition. It's an exciting mission. It's a little bit amorphous, which makes it exciting as well. And I think that's where we need that leadership and a structure that can put together all of the things that we know that a military does with respect to planning for, training for, integrating with. Those are all the things that I think the cyber warfare wing will take an understanding of military mission and put into this new domain. I think it's going to be fascinating and exciting. I'm really looking forward to Mansfield moving out on it. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, sir.
Over here on the right.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, sir. My name is Major General Chris Callahan. I serve as the TAG for Rhode Island. Thanks for coming out today.
Okay,
and
Chris.
just as a caveat, you have no idea how awesome it is to hear about your support for the State Partnership Program. So whatever you can do along those lines, we appreciate your emphasis. Sir, at the broad level, 30,000 feet, and without getting yourself fired, can you kind of share with the group a little bit of how the Air Force is perceiving the defense industry as a partner? So you mentioned, how the multi-compos are working together and how we need to shape our force structure and modernization, but there is this thread within the defense industry, of course, and it's a big piece of the puzzle. So maybe you can share with the group your thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I want to make sure I can be precise and concise, because I could talk on this for quite some time. So let me, if I could make two separate points about that. So first, let's talk about, for lack of a better term, sort of traditional defense industry. The manner in which we're looking to transform the way in which we interact to ensure that we're all moving into this more 21st century software-based DevSecOps, more rapid, agile development in the way that we move forward with developing our platforms of the future. This is largely getting into the acquisition side now, but a shift, a very deliberate shift that the Air Force is moving towards is this idea of more of a digital acquisition approach. And what does that mean? That means that as part of all the capabilities we're going to develop in the future, that we own all the tech base. We know we have the rights to the software, right? So that's important, and I'll get back to that in a second. But the idea that we do digital engineering, so because of the massive, the massive change in computing power over the last 20 to 30 years is really what's really elevated this idea of being able to do the digital modeling to the degree that we can, and the improvements that we can, at the time scale that we can, is that digital engineering is key. Then agile software development, the ability to have a continuous authority to operate so you can update the models and update the software to increase the capabilities. And then the open systems architecture, to where you don't have to have a spaghetti diagram of figuring out which parts and pieces you need to move in the development of that platform or that capability. It's very modular, so that way if defense industry company A has built a mission system or mission support system for a platform going in the future, and then mission support or company B has a better one, we should be able to swap those in and out. So that's the modular piece. So all that means is we're changing the requirements because, and this is not being pejorative to industry at all. Industry needs to make a living as well. So the manner in which our acquisition process had gone on through the, the latter half of the 20th century was, we want the next generation of capability. We want it to do a whole lot of things. So it's going to be expensive. So if it's going to be expensive, it better do a whole lot of things. And if it does a whole lot of things, we can only buy a few of them. So if we can only buy a few, get into that cycle. So then it drives an industry behavior that says, well, if there's only going to be a few, then I got to make sure I do whatever I do to get that. And then they make their money in the operation and sustainment stuff. So we need to shift that paradigm to where we are ensuring that it's not so much the sustainment side, which can be the business model, but you get your business model by having more active design, because once you move that into the design, then you can start to make money by having a better design based on the speed of technology. So that's what sort of the traditional defense industry, how we're sort of evolving together through this digital acquisition approach. Other part, non-traditional. I would tell you the work that AFWorks is doing through their AF Ventures, inviting companies that would have a barrier to entry or a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding or awareness of how they can actually connect to the Air Force. That is exciting as well, because it's a different ecosystem out there that can solve problems in a different way, that can still connect with traditional industry and connect with the Air Force in ways they hadn't before. So there are some exciting things. I know Agility Prime has gotten some of the buzz because, oh, it's a flying car. Well, actually what it's doing is it's stimulating electric vertical takeoff landing capability, which can spur off into several other things. And there might be several military applications. One that would come to mind for me, because I have an active imagination. Boy, how great would it be if instead of having to put our brave National Guardsmen in harm's way fighting fires with the MAF C-130s, if you could mass a whole bunch of those autonomous capabilities and you could do it in a way that you can put more mass on the fire and maybe do things differently. That's just one example. You do search and rescue different. There's all sorts of these things that can come to pass by having this engagement with different parts of the non-traditional industry that I think are exciting as well. So those two things are things we're really leaning into to ensure that we can start catching up with the pace of change in the way that we work with industry and acquire and develop and operate platforms. Long question, a long answer to a very short question, I apologize.
Okay, sir, we have time for one more on the left, and then we'll wrap it up. Go ahead, ma'am.
All right, good morning, sir. Colonel Adria Zucchero from the 128th Air Refueling Wing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is kind of a question and a request all together. It's encouraging to hear you speak about working together. And when we look at our programs and policies, I think it's absolutely necessary. For instance, the new pay system that's coming out needs that permeability that General Goldfein was such a proponent for. We have long known that crossing services, even active duty to Guard, within the Guard Title 10 to Title 32, has huge pay problems and ramifications. And when I've asked this question in other forums to the administrators of the new programs, they seem unaware that that's been a long, enduring problem. So I'm not certain that we've actually tackled it. So my question to you is, how can we be better partners so that the programs and the policies that the Air Force puts out benefits the Guard as well?
Again, this is one of those, it's such a great question, and it's an uncomfortable question, so I'm glad you asked it. Because it's tough. I'll say it right now, we should be further along on this. We should be so much further along on this. And this is where the chief, as part of his follow-on to Accelerate, Change, or Lose, put out 4 action orders. One of them is action order bureaucracy. And that's where I think, it was after action order airmen. So those two come together. I think there's a lot of those that we have not sliced through the bureaucracy, and I will go back to the accelerate change. The bureaucracy could be one of our greatest threats. We understand at the top end, this is important, the permeability, the ability to go back and forth and have those capabilities that are resident be more accessible in a way that is consistent with the way society is going in how we work and how we interact. That is, it's sort of a no-brainer when you look at it conceptually. Breaking through the bureaucratic barriers, I would say it hasn't been from a lack of inputs, but it's getting it to the understanding what the real risk is versus organizational risk. Bureaucracies are wonderful things. I put quotes around wonderful. There's a purpose for bureaucracies. Bureaucracies don't act with malice, but they have a hell of a survival mechanism. And so this idea of understanding how to adapt through this, through the entire bureaucracy of HR is a key one as well. So my unsatisfying answer would be keep pressing, keep pushing. I think there might be opportunities within, as we look at better optimizing, when this pressure I was talking about, there's going to be external pressure too, about how do we do things better, how do we manage manpower better, and the tighter that we squeeze, this may be one of those where it pops up as an idea that has benefits to other places that wouldn't have considered the risk of it. So keep yelling. Keep being our conscience. That's the best that I could say, because it's an idea whose time has come and been here for a while, and we need to move faster on it.
All right, sir, how about we end every policy meeting with, how's that going to affect the Guard?
Or guard from the start. It's total force from the start.
Well, General Allvin, thank you very much for coming today. We've got a memento. I'll step down there with you, and we'll take a photo. But it is a picture of the 109th Airlift Wing doing one of our many unique missions down to the South Pole. They've got 4 blades on the props here, so I know you'll help me get some, add a few blades to those props. So I appreciate your service, and we'll get a photo here, and thank you very much for visiting with us today.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Will the Sergeant Arms and General Allvin's party please escort him from the platform? Thank you again for your time.